Okay, so remember how we've been talking about the Hamas attacks on Israel? Well, things just got a whole lot more complicated with Iran entering the picture.
Definitely a lot to unpack here.
They launched missile attacks, and not just military targets, they actually aimed at civilians in Israel.
Yeah, that's definitely unprecedented. Even during previous conflicts like, the Lebanon War back in 2006 or the Gaza War in 2014, we didn't see this level of direct targeting of civilians.
Exactly, and this has everyone worried, like really worried about the possibility of all-out war, which is a terrifying thought.
Absolutely. And, to really grasp what's happening, we have to see this as like a shift. For years, the conflict between Israel and Iran has been more like, a shadow war. It's all very cloak and dagger with covert operations and supporting different sides in regional conflicts, but rarely this kind of direct confrontation.
Right, like it was always happening in the background, but now Iran is like stepping into the spotlight and making a very public statement.
Exactly. And this New York Times article we're diving into today,
Yeah.
it suggests that Israel might be ready to respond in a big way.
And, to really grasp the weight of what's going on, we need to rewind a bit, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because this isn't just about this one missile attack. This goes back decades, right?
It absolutely does.
Israel's been saying for a long time that Iran wants to, well, to be blunt. They want to wipe them off the map,
Hmm.
and they see Iran's fingerprints all over groups like Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's like Iran's using them as like pawns in this bigger game they're playing.
It's proxy warfare. It's basically a page straight out of the Cold War playbook.
Hmm.
The U.S. and the Soviet Union, they weren't directly fighting each other, but they were backing different sides in all these other conflicts.
Oh, right, right.
So you had all these proxy wars going on. And that's kind of what's happening here. Iran has generally avoided directly attacking Israel itself. But this latest move, it's being seen as a major, major escalation, especially, coming right after the Hamas attacks.
Yeah, it feels very deliberate, like they're trying to send a message with the timing of all this, and it's really got people on edge. The article even quotes an Israeli official saying, they don't understand what October 7 has done to the Israeli people, to their willingness to take much more risks.
Right.
It's like the Hamas attacks have really shaken things up, and now there's all this pressure on Israel's government.
They have to be seen as taking action, showing strength.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so important. We need to understand not just what's happening, but why it's happening now at this very moment.
Right. What's changed?
So we've got this long history of tension, like we talked about, but what's shifted recently? What could push things to a boiling point?
Well, I mean, like we were saying, those Hamas attacks, they really put Israel in a tough spot. There's this expectation that they have to respond and respond forcefully.
Right, like they can't be seen as backing down, especially with, the U.S. elections coming up. Everything gets amplified on the world stage with that in the mix.
Absolutely. And speaking of the U.S., the article mentions that last time Iran launched missiles, Israel wasn't too thrilled with the U.S. calling for restraint.
Yeah, I remember that. It caused a lot of tension.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it highlights the delicate balancing act the U.S. has to pull off here. They want to stand by Israel, a crucial ally, but they also don't want to get dragged into another major conflict in the Middle East, especially not right before an election. That's a whole other hornet's nest.
So they're urging restraint, but what if Israel feels like they have no other choice but to, hit back? What are we even talking about here? What kind of response could they actually make?
Well, the article lays out a few possibilities. Some are, shall we say, more explosive than others.
Mhm.
For example, they could go after Iran's oil production. That would be a major escalation.
Oh, wow. So not just like a symbolic strike, but actually trying to cripple their economy.
Exactly.
And wouldn't that send shockwaves through the global energy market? Like oil prices would go through the roof, countries that rely on Iranian oil would be scrambling, and some might even go into recession.
Exactly. It would be a huge gamble, frankly, and it's hard to predict how it would play out. The U.S. is already trying to keep the global economy afloat. This kind of move could backfire on Israel big time and even strain their relationship with the U.S. even more.
Okay, so oil's obviously a huge factor, but what about, and I think we all have this question in the back of our minds, what about Iran's nuclear facilities? Is Israel thinking about, going after those?
It's interesting. The article actually suggests those are off the table, at least for the time being.
Mm-hmm.
Targeting nuclear sites is a whole different ballgame. It's incredibly complex and would almost certainly require the U.S. to be directly involved. And as we've discussed, it's not a given right now.
Right. The U.S. has been pretty hesitant, to say the least.
Exactly.
So they're holding back on that for now. But even if they just hit, like, oil fields or military bases, that's still a massive escalation. I mean, is it really going to deter Iran, or could it actually make things worse in the long run?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the article brings up an interesting point, quoting experts who believe that just using brute force might not actually weaken Iran's regime in the long term.
Really? So you're saying it could even have the opposite effect?
It might sound counterintuitive, but think about it. If Israel launches these major strikes, it plays right into the hands of the hardliners in Iran. It reinforces their whole worldview, that the West, and Israel in particular, are existential threats. It justifies their aggressive stance.
And that just creates this vicious cycle, doesn't it? Where each act of aggression just leads to more violence and pushes any chance of a peaceful resolution further away.
Exactly. It could even push Iran to, ramp up support for Hamas and Hezbollah, maybe even accelerate their nuclear program. The law of unintended consequences at work.
So what's the answer then? How does Israel respond in a way that shows strength but doesn't play into Iran's hands and make the situation even more volatile? It's like, how do you even begin to untangle something this complicated?
Right. It really highlights why we need to look deeper, go beyond just the headlines.
Because there's so much history here.
Exactly. Decades of really intense, complicated relationships, all these political calculations, internal and external pressures.
And the impact this could have not just on the Middle East, but on, the entire world.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get caught up in every new development, every missile launch, every statement from a leader. But this situation, it's the result of so many factors.
So much history.
Yeah. And we've talked about how Israel might respond, about the U.S. trying to walk this tightrope. But what about Iran itself? What's going on inside Iran right now? They've got their own problems to deal with.
Oh, right. Their economy's a mess, isn't it?
It really is. They're dealing with some serious economic hardship, and there were these growing divisions within the country. This whole conflict with Israel, it could be a way for them to, deflect attention from those internal problems.
Right, like a distraction.
Exactly. Rally the people against a common enemy. But it's risky,
Yeah, for sure. Because it could backfire.
Totally. I mean, it could easily make things even more unstable.
It's like, what's that saying? Playing with fire.
Exactly. And then there's the human cost.
Oh, right.
It's easy to get caught up in all the geopolitics, but at the end of the day, this is about real people on both sides whose lives are being turned upside down. There was this quote in the article that really got me thinking. An Israeli official said, "They don't understand what October 7 has done to the Israeli people, to their willingness to take much more risks."
Wow.
It really underscores how personal this has become. It's not just about strategy and politics anymore.
Yeah, it's about survival, about fear, about anger.
Exactly.
This isn't something you can just fix with a treaty or a ceasefire. The wounds run deep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There are no easy answers here. Any action, any escalation, it's going to have real consequences for millions of people.
So where do we go from here? I mean, we've talked about the immediate situation, the potential scenarios, the global impact. It's a lot to take in. Any final thoughts for our listeners? Something to think about as the situation continues to unfold.
I think the biggest takeaway here is that this story is far from over. We've analyzed Israel's potential moves, dissected the U.S.'s role, but keep an eye on Iran. Watch what happens internally.
Because that could be the key to the whole thing.
Absolutely.
Huh.
The economic pressures, the political divisions within Iran, those could be just as influential as any military action in shaping how this ultimately plays out.
It's like we've zoomed in on this one moment in time, but the picture is so much bigger.
Yeah, this isn't just about missiles and airstrikes.
This is about the future of the Middle East, maybe even the world.
And that's why it's so important to stay informed, to keep learning, to try to understand the complexities. That's what these deep dives are all about.
Couldn't agree more. This has been a heavy one, but as always, I feel like I've learned so much. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Stay informed, stay curious, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.